How you doing there? Welcome back. Oh man, am I going to need water for this one? Maybe I should bring over the water. But I should be okay. Although, I guess my cough is still not totally gone. But again, it's getting late. It's 8:45 at night. Today, where are we? Hi. Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Gimel, Daf 13 of Masechta Horayos. Friends, we're almost at the end. Thankfully, Daf Yud of Masechta Horayos is tiny, which is amazing because it gives me a chance to get caught up a little bit. I get to squeeze in this other daf. I was hoping to squeeze it in yesterday and then today, but it looks like I'm gonna have to squeeze it in at some point. But it's good. Hopefully, I can catch up a little bit because we have a tiny little daf there. But anyways, that also means that hopefully today's daf will be slightly shorter because I'm gonna leave some of Daf Yud Gimel to do. It kind of is part of Daf Yud Daled. So anyways, fine. Where are we? The point is we are getting towards the end of Masechta Horayos, which is very exciting because sheesh, as we all know, Masechta Horayos was a small but hard Masechta, just humongous daf after humongous daf of difficult content. So, chavesh koyach for hanging in there and making it through Masechta Horayos. On today's daf, so it's the last three Mishnayos of Masechta Horayos, and these Mishnayos are relatively interesting. They talk about precedence, right? We're gonna learn the concept of Tadr v'she'eno Tadr kodem, which is a pretty well known concept. That whatever these are questions of what comes before what. So we are going to learn about precedence for korbanis, which korbanis come before which other korbanis. Precedence for men and women, whatever. That's the second Mishnah we'll get to. Yeah, it's weird. We'll get there. And then hierarchies within the yidden. Like Kohanim, Levim, Israelim. So anyways, that is what's on today's agenda for today. And let's do the second to last daf of Masechta Horayos. All right, friends, we're going to begin on Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis at the Mishnah. Was it 4 or 5? 5 lines from the bottom. Kol atodir mechaver kodem es chavero. Okay, something that is more regular, more tadir, constant. Constant is probably maybe a better word. So something that's more constant, you have precedence first, right? I don't know, I'm just thinking of a random example. Like, for example, when Rosh Chodesh falls out on... This is nothing related to our Gemara. It's just right? For example, when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, so do you do Ritzei first or do you do Yalav Yova first? You do Ritzei first because Kol Atadr Kodem. It's more common. So again, Kol Atadr Mechaver Kodem is Chaver. Anything that is more common, more constant, gets precedence. This is interesting. Anything that is more holy than its counterpart, so it gets precedence. It's it's kind of I don't know, whatever. What am I saying? I don't know. I spent a lot of time in my head trying to figure out exactly what this means. But anyways, whatever. Maybe I think you could say anything that's more holy than its counter, then the next thing gets precedence. Let's say that. Par HaMashiach upar Eda omdim. When you have before you a par Mashiach and a par Ha'eda, right? We talked about that the other day, right? What happens if the Bezdin, the Sanhedrin, had ruled about Chalev and he had done something about blood, about dam or something like that, right? So there's going to be a and the Kohen Gadol is going to bring a par Kohen Mashiach. So, where am I? So, par Mashiach, far Eda, omdim, par Mashiach, kodem the far Eda b'chomaisev. So, the par Mashiach is going to have precedence. Par Mashiach is going to have precedence, and we are going to discuss it in the Gemara. Okay, let me drink a little water. All right, so now says the Gemara, how do we know? Kol atadir mechavero, kodem es chavero. Amabai says, because the apostle says, milvad oila sabeker ashel eila satomid yasu es ele ka'ele. Right? Everyone knows that, I think, right? So, anyways, so the pasuk says milvad eila sabeker ashel. Right? This is talking about the korban musaf, and it says milvad eila sabeker, that the korban musaf. Now, korban musaf. I don't remember. Maybe what this is. This like on Pesach or something like that? Anyways, I think, do we read this on? I feel like we read this on Pesach. But anyways, so I didn't actually look it up. Is this Daf talking about the korban musaf of Pesach? Maybe. But anyways, should I look it up? Let me quickly look this up. Okay, yeah, so I just looked it up. That pasuk is by the korban musaf of Pesach. So now, of course, the korban musaf of Pesach happens only on Pesach time. So the pasuk says, "Milvad olas haboker ashel olas hatomid," that the korban musafin of Pesach were offered aside from the olas haboker asher olas hatomid. Aside from the olas haboker, from the korbanis that are offered every single morning. So it says, okay, so the korban musaf of Pesach was offered milvad olas haboker, aside from the ola, the korban ola that's offered every morning, ashel olas hatomid, that is the olas hatomid. So michtek siv olas haboker olas hatomid lama li. If it already says the olas haboker, if it already says the olas haboker, so what? So just say milvad olas haboker, aside from the morning korbanos that we bring every morning. Why is it ashel olas hatomid? The olas haboker, that is the constant ola. That is the standard ola. Why do we have to point that out? Ola satamid lamali hachikam rechmana kol ditadira kadma. What the Torah is saying, it's making a point, saying ashel ola satamid, that whenever you have a scenario like this, you're with the tamid, the one that's tamid is always going to take precedence, right? That you have the korban tamid that you offer every single morning. So that is always going to come first, and the musaf is going to go after that, because kol atadir mechaveru kodem es chaveru. That's why the Torah points out that it's not just milvad olas haboker, but asher olas hatomid. That is the constant one, it's the consistent one, it's the daily one, and therefore something that's consistent and constant and more common is always going to take precedence over something that is less common. V'chol hamakudish mechaveru, who kodem es chaveru, and anything that's more holy than something else gets precedence. Minal and Hadam, listen, the Tana Dvei Bishmal, stop at the Bismillah Bishmal, the Kidashto, it says by a coin, the Kidashto, that a coin you have to make him holy. And what does that mean, make him holy? The Chodavar Shebekidusha, Livtoyach Rishon, Livarech Rishon, Litol Monayafe Rishon. It means, what does it mean that you make the coin holy? You give him precedence. He gets the first aliyah by Kriyas HaTorah. He gets precedence, right? That's why often by a zimun, they'll say any kehanim over here. Little money yafarishon, give him the nice portion. Have him get his choice of the portions. So they give precedence. So every kidashto, make the kohen holy by giving him precedence. The Mishnah had said that when you have a par kohen Mashiach that needs to be offered, as well as a par l'davashol tzibur that needs to be offered, the par kohen Mashiach has precedence. Now we are going to discuss a whole bunch of different halachis by precedence by korbanos. Some interesting stuff over here. Of course, we're going to be starting Masechta Zvachim in 2 days from now. Wow, it's going to, korbanos is going to be our language for the next year and a half, 2 years. How do we know this precedence that the par kohen Mashiach gets precedence? Also, kasher sarf is apar rishon. So, if you look in the 4th chapter of the book of what's Vayikra? Leviticus. The book of Leviticus. If you look in chapter 4 of the book of Leviticus, so first you will see a description of the par kohen Mashiach. And after that, there will be a description of the par helem dover shel tzibur. And by the par helem dover shel tzibur, there's two psukim of note. The first pasuk, it says, it's actually not quoted in our Gemara, but I think it's v'asizim asa par. Oh, actually, I think does Rashi quote it? V'osu lepar kasher also lepar achatas. That you'll do to this cow, the par helem dover shel tzibur, like you did to the par achatas, to the par of the par kohen Mashiach. So we already have a pasuk that says that you're gonna treat, that you're gonna do with the par helem dover shel tzibur like you did with the par kohen Mashiach. So then, why do we need the following pasuk? V'saraf also kasher saraf is the par rishon, and you'll burn the par helem dover shel tzibur like you burn the par kohen Mashiach. We already had the previous pasuk that says v'aso the par kasher also the par achatos. We already have the previous pasuk that says that you'll do to the par helem dover shel tzibur like you did with the par kohen Mashiach. So why do I need this next pasuk to say, and you're going to burn it like you burned the par kohen Mashiach? Of course, you're going to do everything like the par kohen Mashiach. So it's always a par harishan mata malomar. You could skip the word harishan if you want. Shehei rishon kodem lepar or eda b'chol ma'asav. You know why we have this extra pasuk, which is unnecessary? Because it's teaching us something. That when it says v'sarif also kasher sarif is a par harishan, this pasuk is coming to teach us that the kasher also the par harishan, the par kohen Mashiach is the rishon. It's the first one. That when you have two korbanis in front of you, a par kohen Mashiach and a par helem dover shel tzibur, the par kohen Mashiach is the rishon. It's the one that goes first. The rabbis taught par kohen Mashiach ufar ha'eda omdim. Okay, if you have the par kohen Mashiach and the par ha'eda, par kohen Mashiach kodem ufar ha'eda b'chol ma'asav. All of the actions, all of the things that you have to do for the par kohen Mashiach take precedence to the par helem dover shel tzibur. Hoyil u'Mashiach mechaper be'eda miskaperes. Because I think the point is that since the Kohen provides the atonement, whereas the congregation receives the atonement, dinu sheyatim amichaper lemiskaper. So it makes sense that the one who is going to be providing the atonement should receive atonement before those who are going to receive atonement. As I'm saying this, I feel like something's coming to my perspective is coming to my mind that I didn't realize until now. Meaning, it sounds almost like also like the Kohen Mashiach did something that he needs atonement for. The congregation did something that they need atonement for. So which gets precedence? Well, who's going to be the one doing the service for the congregation? Well, the Kohen. So it makes sense that he should first offer his korban, he should get atonement, and then he'll work and do the korban of the tzibur, and so that they could receive their atonement. So let the one doing the service first atone for himself, so that he could then do the service to provide for the rest of the people. Similarly, it says, I think this is probably the best shot. I didn't think about it from that specific perspective until now. But also it says on Yom Kippur that the Kohen Gadol v'chiper baido, first he atones for himself, uvad beso, and then for his family, and vad kol Yisrael, and then for all of Am Yisrael, that he first kind of makes sure that he's atoned for before then moving on to making sure that other people are atoned. Par helem dover shel tzibur kodem lepar shel avodas kochavim. My time high chatas vai ola. V'tanya v'ikriv eza shel chatas rishona matamu lomar melamed shetei chatas rishona hayik var nemar ve'eza sheni yaisa ola kamishbot ela zebona av shiei kol chatos kodmus le olos. Where is this pasuk from? Is it from a Mitzvah or something? Maybe. Oh, no. This is by Korban Olivioid. I'm going to drink a little more water. So there's an important principle that was just laid out here. And this important, we'll read it inside again in a second, but there's an important principle that was just laid out here. And that principle is that a Korban Chatos takes precedence to a korban ola. A korban chatas takes precedence to a korban ola. And therefore, let's read this again. So if you have a paralim davar shel tzibur is a korban chatas. Now, a par avodas kuchavim, what's a par avodas kuchavim? If an individual does avodah zarah by accident, it's a seira. So what's a par avodas kuchavim? It's when Bezdin rules, Sanhedrin rules that, for example, you're allowed to bow down to Markulis, so everyone goes and does it. Then they realize they made a mistake. So they bring a par le'ola and a sa'ir lechatas. A par le'ola and a sa'ir lechatas. So therefore, if we have the par helam davar shel tzibur, and which is a chatas, and the par of avodah zarah, which is an ola, so the helam davar shel tzibur is going to take precedence because it is a chatas. Chatas take precedence over olas, and the proof that the Gemara brings is from a korban ola ve'yoreid, right, which we learned all about in the first two prakim of Masechta Shavuos, and as we've been learning about recently in Masechta Horayos as well, that a korban ola ve'yoreid is for things like Shvuas Bitui, Tumas Mikdash V'Kodasham, Shvuas Ha'edus, that if you can afford it, right, it's based on what you can afford. If you can afford it, so you bring a seir or kispa. Otherwise, you bring birds. Otherwise, you bring a flower offering. And we say by the birds, so you would bring two birds, one for a chatas and one for an ola. And it says that the chatas takes precedence over the ola. So, again, par lemdavar shel tzibur kodem par shel avodas kuchavim. The par lemdavar shel tzibur, which is a par achatos, takes precedence over the par shel avodas kuchavim, which is a par of an ola. My time my chatas by ola, because the par lemdavar shel tzibur is a chatas, whereas by avodah zarah it is an ola. V'tanya, and we learn in a brisa by korban ola v'yored, if one is bringing birds as their korban, v'hikriv eis asher lechatos rishon. It says that the bird that is a chatos goes first. Matam lomar, how come the Torah had to specifically say that the chatos goes first? In the lamech te chatos rishon, if it's simply to teach us that technically speaking, the bird chatos precedes the bird chatos precedes the bird ola. But well, we have another passage that says, and the second one is the ola. So if the second one's the ola, so the first one's the chatas. So ella zebona of what this is teaching us. Is that the Torah was specifically saying that the chatas is first. What it's teaching us zebona of, that this is a precedent for all scenarios where you have a chatas and an ola. That whenever you have a chatas and an ola, the chatas takes precedence over the ola. And we learn that even a chatas of a bird takes precedence over the ola of a behemoth. So, for example, by a yoledes, I looked this up. I think I looked this up yesterday. I think that what I'm saying, I think that this is correct. You could look it up in the beginning of Parshas Tazria. So a yoledes, a woman gives birth. So after 40 days for a boy or 80 days for a girl, she brings a korban, and she brings a bird as a chatos and a sheep as an ola. And we're saying that the bird chatos takes precedence over the sheep ola, because a chatos takes precedence over an ola. So now if you have the par of avodah zarah, which is an ola, kodem the sari avodah zarah. Interesting. So that takes precedence. So again, if Bezdin ruled about avodah zarah, and then the people did the avodah zarah based on the ruling, so the korban is a par leola and a sari lechatas. So actually, the par leola takes precedence over the sa'ir lechatas. Amai, how come? I chatas va'ola. I thought we just laid out the principle that chatas is precede olas. So why are we saying here that the par leola precedes the sa'ir lechatas? We even said that a bird chatas takes precedence over an animal chatas. So again, why is the Ola proceeding? So I'm my Rav Mishmei de Rav by Mori Chatos Avodas Kochavim Chasera Aleph Lechatas Ksiv. So if you look at the pasuk by the Chatos, by these korbanis, by Avodah Zarah, when the Sanhedrin ruled, etc. So the pasuk says that a chatos, that a par is Ola, and a sorry lechatos. The word lechatos in that pasuk is missing the letter aleph. So it's missing the letter aleph to say that it's like the Torah specifically went out of its way to drop the aleph to allude to the fact that the chatas kind of is secondary. The chatas is secondary to the ola in this case, and the par leola will precede the sar lechatas. Rav Omer says, Rav kamishpat ksiv bei, that the pasuk by these korbanis, the par leola, the sar lechatas. So it says also in that pasuk kamishpat in its order, and the pasuk itself it teaches. The order is the ola first and then lechatas. So if we read the pasuk, what does the pasuk say? I'm reading the pasuk. Par ben bakar echad leola. So it says kamishpat as it's laid it out over here, as laid out this rule in this pasuk. And what does the rule in this pasuk say? Well, first it says the par leola, and only afterwards does it talk about the sar lechatas. So it's in that order. Sorry, avodas kochavim, calling the sar nasi, the sa'ir of avodah zarah, again by the communal avodah zarah offering. So the sar chatas of avodah of this avodah zarah korban will take precedence to the sa'ir of the king. My time, how come? Because the avodah zarah offerings for the tzibur are for the congregation, whereas the king is an individual, so the congregation takes precedence over the individual. Sorry, nasi called him the siras yachid. Now the sa'ir of the nasi takes precedence over the se'ira of avodah zarah, accidental avodah zarah, inadvertent avodah zarah of an individual. My time, how come? Haimelech by hedget. Well, because the king takes precedence over a commoner. Se'iras yochid kodemes le kivsas yochid. Now, if there is a se'ira of an individual versus a kisba of an individual, so if there are two korbanis to be offered, one yid offered a se'ira, I imagine either as a korban chatas or as a korban for avodah zarah, and somebody else had offered a kisba, a sheep. So this is machlokas. So we say over here, se'iras yochid kodemes lekibsas yochid, that the goat takes precedence over the sheep. We have another brayso that says that the sheep takes precedence over the goat. Amar Bai Tanohi. So Bai says it's taka. Machlokes Tanoi Marsa v'seira adifa shekenis rabba etzav v'diskochov. So one opinion, right? One brayso gives precedence to the goat because goats are more ubiquitous. How so? Well, by a korban chatas, one can offer either a goat or a sheep. By a korban of avodah zarah, the options are a goat, just a goat. That's the only option, a goat. So we see that whereas sheep is only by a regular korban chatas, a goat is both by a regular korban chatas as well as by the chatas for having done avodah zarah by accident. So because it's more ubiquitous, more common, so therefore it gets precedence. The other opinion is that the sheep gets precedence because a sheep has a fatty tail, and the fatty tail is offered on the mizbeach as part of the emurim, emurim. So therefore, because the sheep has the fatty tail that goes on the mizbeach, it gets precedence according to that opinion. Omer kodem lekeves imo, the korban omer, the barley flour. Again, we are starting to learn Masechta Zvachim. We are beginning Seder Kodshim. Horayos is like kind of like a transition already into that. We are going to be learning about korbanis. Zvachim is going to be more animal korbanis. After Zvachim, after a few months of Zvachim, we will learn Minochis. The korban Omer is the Minchas Omer, is a korban mincha. That was a barley offering that was offered on the 16th day of Nisan. And together with the barley offering was a keves. Where am I? Omer kodem the keves abayimo. Together with the minchas haomer on the 16th day of Nisan was offered a keves, I believe, le'ola, if I'm not mistaken. So the minchas haomer took precedence over the sheep that came with it. Shtei alechen kodem the kvasim abayim imoyin. The shtei alechen, which was on Shavuos, that was, I believe, one of the 2 times in the Beis Hamikdash that there was chametz that was offered, the shtei alechem on Shavuos, as well as 10 of the breads by a korban toda. Anyways, with the shtei alechem, with these wheat breads on Shavuos, were offered 2 shalmei tzibur, 2 sheep as shalmei tzibur, public shlomim offerings. I believe that those were the only instances of public shlomim. Usually a shlomim is an individual korban. Anyways, the shtei alechem takes precedence over the sheep that come with them. The kvazim, this is the rule. Dover abba begin liyom, kol dover abba begin lechem. Something that is being brought because of the day, such as the minchas haomer, the shtei alechem, because it's Shavuos, because it's the korban omer. Right? If that's kind of the reason for the korban, so that takes precedence over the sheep that is offered along with it. But the main thing is the minchas haomer or the shtei alechem. That's kind of the main event there, and therefore it takes precedence. And now we get up to the next section of today's daf and the next Mishnah. Precedence for men and women. What does this mean? So it says the Mishnah, Ha'ish kodem leisha, a man takes precedence over a woman. To say, like to live and to return a lost object. I think what lachayos means is, like, for example, if you have a man and a woman are drowning and you can only save one, who do you save? It sounds like it's saying, save the boy. And if there is a lost object, and I guess you can only return one of them, so we return the boys. Now, a woman takes precedence over a man if, I guess, they're both in need of clothing, and there's only clothing for one of them, so the clothing goes to the woman. As well as, unfortunately, as sad as and terrible as it is in 2025, this is still a relevant sugya. Unfortunately, captivity. This is absolutely horrible that this is still a reality for yidden in 2025. But of course, we are still living under an experience where yidden were taken hostage, and the only hostages remaining are all men. All of the women had priority in terms of pidyon shvuyim and being freed from captivity. So when it comes to release from captivity, women take precedence over men. However, if they are in a scenario where the man is going to be subject to sodomy, so then he takes precedence and get him out of there quicker. Says the Gemara, if a fellow and his father and his rebbe and his teacher were in captivity, and it sounds like basically he has an option to get himself, he has an option to get out one of them, either himself or his father or his rebbe, who called him the rabbi. So if he can get himself out, get himself out. Interesting. The rabbi called him the aviv, and if he can get, I guess, out himself and another one, so himself and his rebbe, and then I guess his father. Imo kodemis lechulam, but if his mother is there with them, she takes precedence over all of them. Chacham kodem lemelech Yisrael, a Talmud Chacham takes precedence over the king of Israel. Why? Because Chacham shemeis ein lanu kayotzebo melech Yisrael shemeis kol Yisrael ru'im lemalchus. Very interesting. Because a Chacham who dies, there's no replacement. There's no replacement for a Chacham who dies. What does Rashi say? Rashi says, "She'ein kol yisor ru'uyin l'chachma." Not all yidden are fit for wisdom. Aval melech kol yisor ru'uyin l'malchus. But all yidden are fit to be kings. So therefore, Talmud Chacham take precedence over kings. Melech kodem the Kohen Gadol. A king takes precedence to a Kohen Gadol. Shenemar, as it says by King David. What does it say there? It says, "Vayomer hamelech lohem k'chuimachem abdei adonechem ve'gomer." This was by King Solomon. When at the end of King David's life, Adoniah went to and tried to become king. They reported to King David. King David says, "Okay, you have to go and anoint Solomon as king," and he instructs them. And together with them was what was the name of the Kohen Gadol? I can't remember now. What was the name? Wait, I think, does it say over there? Tzaddik the Kohen Gadol. So it says, Tzaddik the Kohen Gadol was there, and it says, "V'yomar melech lehem ku imachem avdei ku imachem." I guess I don't know. Avdei adonechem, the servants of your adon, of your master. So meaning so the king referred to the Kohen Gadol as like a subject of his. So therefore, king takes precedence over Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol called Manavi, the high priest takes precedence over a prophet. Shenemar umashach also sham tzaddik hakohen v'nosen anavi hiktim tzaddik linosen. There were tzaddik hakohen, the Kohen Gadol, and nosen, the prophet. And we mentioned tzaddik before nosen because precedence goes to the high priest over a prophet. V'omer, and the pasuk says, "Shmano Yoshua Kohen Hagadol Atav Reach of the Gomer." That the pasuk says in Zechariah, listen up, Yoshua the Kohen Hagadol, and it says in that pasuk also Anshe Moifes. So Yochel Adjotas, is it possible that the other people there were just regular people? Hayu Tamloma Ki Anshe Moifes. It says that they are men of wonders. Ve'ein Moifes elanavi, and Moifes is a prophet. Shnemer v'nosan elecha ois oy Moifes. So basically, Yoshua Kohen Gadol was with other prophets, and he got precedence over them. Mashuach b'shem mishcha kodem lemiruba begadim. Kohen Gadol, who's Mashuach b'shem mishcha, takes precedence over a meruba begadim. Meruba begadim kodem le Mashiach she'avar. The meruba begadim takes precedence over a Kohen she'avar, right? It's somebody who was Kohen Gadol but is no longer Kohen Gadol. It was just temporarily Kohen Gadol. Machmas. Wait, what? Begadim kodem le Mashiach she'avar. Machmas Kerio. Okay. So if you have a Kohen Gadol who's no longer Kohen Gadol because he saw Keri, okay, so that Merub Begadim would take precedence over him. But Sheikh She'ovar Machmas Kerio, Kodem le Over Machmas Mumo, and a Kohen Gadol who is not currently Kohen Gadol because he became a Baal Keri, he would take precedence over someone who's no longer Kohen Gadol because he has a blemish. Of Machmas Mumo Kodem le Meshuach Milchama, and a Kohen Gadol who's no longer Kohen Gadol because he got a blemish, he takes precedence over the Meshuach Milchama. Meshuach Milchama Kodem Lisgan, and the Meshuach Milchama takes precedence over this Sgan, the deputy Kohen Gadol. Sgan Kodem le Amrochel, and the Sgan Kohen Gadol takes precedence over the Amrochel. My Amrochel, Omar Rav Chizde, Omar Kula, says Rav Chizde, he's the Omar Kula. He's somebody who is like a macher, a kochlef. He's a person involved in decision making. Amrochel called him the Gizber. The Amrochel comes before the treasurer. Gizber called him the Rosh Mishmar, and the treasurer takes precedence over the head of the Mishmar. Right? Of course, there were 24 Mishmaros, divisions of Krihanim in the base Hamikdash. So somebody was the head of a division. So the treasury takes precedence over him. Rosh Mishmar called him the Rosh base of, and the head of a Mishmar takes precedence over the head of a base of. Right, Mishmars were further divided into 6 subgroups, which were called Batei Avos, that each one would serve a different day in the temple, and on Shabbos they would all serve. So the head of a Mishmar takes precedence over the head of a base of. Rosh base of called him the Kohen Hedget, and the head of a base of takes precedence over an ordinary kohen. If it comes to tumah, so for example, as we're going to see in a second, an example that if you have 2 kohanim and they're walking down the road and there's a mace mitzvah, So the question is, which one of them should become tamei to bury the meis mitzvah? Skan u'meshuach milchama ezimim kodem. So if you have a skan kohen gadol and a meshuach milchama walking down the road and they interact with a meis mitzvah, so who should become tamei to bury the meis mitzvah? Amar v'zutra beider of Nachman Tashma Kamnir Desani Skan u'meshuach milchama she'ayu malcham baderech ufago ben meis mitzvah mutav sheyitama meshuach milchama v'yitama skan. So the meshuach milchama should become tamei to bury the meis mitzvah, not the skan kohen gadol. Shem yerabo psul b'kohen gadol nichnas skan u'mishamish tachtav. Because if some kind of a psul, an invalidation, a disqualification would happen to the kohen gadol, so the deputy kohen gadol would have to step up immediately. So it would be preferable for the meshuach milchama to become tamei to bury the meis mitzvah rather than the skan kohen gadol. V'atanya meshuach milchama called him the skan, but we had said that precedence goes to the meshuach milchama. So it sounds like he's more important. It sounds like the skan should become tamei. In terms of keeping him alive, so then that priority there would go to the skan kohen to the meshuach milchama. But over here, in terms of burying a meis mitzvah, the precedence would go to the skan kohen gadol, i.e., the meshuach milchama would become tamei to bury the meis mitzvah, because if a disqualification happens to kohen gadol, we will need the skan kohen gadol to be able to fill in for him. And now we have arrived at the third and final section of today's daf, and the third and final mishnah, and the final mishnah of all of Masechta Horayos. Says the final mishnah of Masechta Horayos and all of Masechta and all of Seder Nezikin. This is the final. Actually, no. I think after Horayos, I think maybe comes Adius, which is not part of Daf Yomi. So maybe the last mishnah in Adius would be the last mishnah in Nezikin. But anyways, Kohen Levi says the mishnah that a priest comes before a Levite. Levi li Yisrael, a Levi has precedence over a Yisrael. Yisrael li mamzer, a Yisrael has precedence over a mamzer. Mamzer li nosin, and a mamzer has precedence over a nosin. Those were the Givonim. Those were the people who tricked Yoshua into being kept alive, and they converted. And nosin leger, a nosin has precedence over a proselyte. V'ger le'evid mishucher, a proselyte has precedence over a freed evid, a freed slave. A Mosai, when bisman shekulim shabim. These hierarchies are for when everybody is basically on an equal playing field. So then we look at these hierarchies to see who has precedence with maybe to save them, and whatever precedent stuff we were talking about earlier. Avol imhoya mamzer tamud chacham. But what if you have a mamzer who's mamash tamud chacham, and you have a kohen gadol who's a shmendrik? Mamzer tamud chacham kodem, the kohen gadol amaretz. A mamzer who's a tamud chacham takes precedence over even a kohen gadol who's an amaretz, who doesn't know anything. Givaldik. The koyach of limud Torah, chever. The koyach of limud Torah, so Babble on Tom. Says the Gemara, Kohen kodem lelevi shenemar. A priest has precedence over a Levite, as the pasuk says in Divrei Yom. Bnei Amram, Aharon, and Moshe. The yingles of Amram were Aharon and Moshe. Vayibodel Aharon lakdisho kodesh kodoshin. And Aharon, the priest, was separated to be, was taken to be the very, very, very holy. So, okay, precedence goes to Kohen over a Levi. Now, Levi called him Yisrael Shenemar, Parisoi Vayavdel, Vayisoi Hivdel Hashem Shevet HaLevi, Vegomer, it says there that the Rabbani Shalom separated out the tribe of Levi, so they get precedence over the rest of Israel. Yisrael called him the Mamzer, she's a Meyuchos, V'zen Meyuchos. A Yisrael has precedence over a Mamzer because a Yisrael has lineage, whereas a Mamzer, his lineage isn't great. His parents, he's a Mamzer because he was born to a problematic union. Mamzer called him Le Nosin. A Mamzer has precedence over a Nosin, she's about Mitipa Ksherev, he's about Mitipa Psula. The reason being that ultimately a mamzer, even though he's a mamzer, his parents are yidden. whereas a nosin, ultimately, if you go back enough generations to their source, they were not yidden. Nosin kodem leger zegodol imanu b'kedusha v'zelo godol imanu b'kedusha. A nosin has precedence over a proselyte because a nosin, even though he's a nasin, still he grew up among yidden, whereas a proselyte did not. He only came to yidden later, so therefore a nosin has precedence over a proselyte. Ger kodem le'eved meshuchur shezeh hoya b'chal or v'zelo hoya b'chal or. A proselyte takes precedence over a freed slave because as Noach curses his son Canaan, Cham, right? Shem, Cham, and Yafes. So Cham, and then Noach curses Cham what does it say? Or Canaan. What does the pasuk say? Canaan lo matza Noach klal lechnan gedol mizo she eved lachiv. Right? It says vi Canaan eved lamo. So we see that that's a curse to be an eved, and therefore because this now freed slave was once a slave, so he was bichlal or, and therefore the proselyte would take precedence over a freed slave. A Moshe Bisman Shakul and Shabim, we said that is when they're all equals. But if a mamzer is a Talmud Chacham, he'll take precedence over a Kohen Gadol who is an Amma. Or it's been on the middle. I don't know this on Rav Acha, Rav Chanina, Damar Kar, because the pasuk says, Yekara yimi pninim, that the Torah is more precious than pearls. The Torah is even more precious than the Kohen Gadol who goes into the Holy of Holies. And therefore, even if you have a mamzer, but he's a Talmud Chacham, he has an intimate relationship with the Torah, that is on a higher level even than the Kohen Gadol who goes into the Holy of Holies if the Kohen Gadol is an Am Ha'aretz. Tani, we learn in the Brayso of Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Badinu sheyaktim eved meshuchar leger. So in practice, or in principle, really, a freed slave should take precedence over a proselyte. Shezeh gadal imanu b'kedusha v'zeh lo gadal imanu b'kedusha. Because in Eved Kanani, who was born and raised among Yidden, should take precedence, right, and understands the Yiddish way of life, should take precedence over a proselyte who didn't grow up with that. Ella zaya b'chal or v'zeh lo b'chal or. The difference is that the Eved was bichlal arur, as we learned, and therefore the proselyte takes precedence. Shalom Tamidav Elazar Reb Tzadok's students asked him, how come people would be more interested in marrying a proselytess than a shifcha Canaanis who was freed? Reb Tzadok answered, because the shifcha Canaanis was bichlal arur, cursed, as we saw from the curse of Noach to Canaan, whereas the proselytess was never cursed. Alternatively, the assumption is that a shifcha Canaanis was a little bit hefkery, slept with a lot of different people, whereas the proselytess was not necessarily that way. Rashi gives an explanation that, also particularly as it became clear that she wanted to convert to Judaism, so she kind of was less mufkar, I guess you could say, more guarded. Charlotte Tamidav as Rabbi Elazar, I think this is the Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok, his students asked him, Kelev makir eskono v'chosel eino makir eskono. How come a dog recognizes his master, whereas a cat does not? Right? A dog recognizes his owner, whereas a cat doesn't care. Amar lohem ma ochel mima she'achbar ochel mishakeach ochel achbar atzmo al achas kama v'chama. We're going to learn soon that somebody who eats from something that a mouse ate from is going to be forgetful. It's going to forget his learning. So certainly a cat that doesn't just eat from what mice eat from, but eat the mouse itself. So certainly Ironically, I can't even remember. Right. Certainly a cat will forget will not recognize or care about his owner. Rabelazar's students asked him, why does everybody rule over the mouse? The mouse is a rodent at the bottom of the food chain. Because they have a bad disposition. What's bad about their disposition? They even eat clothing. That's not their food. They just make holes in it. They're rodents. They even eat the handles of an axe. If there is, right, I spent a few weeks this past winter in the mountains of what was the name of that mountain range? The Blue Ridge Mountains. And there were mice around there. And those mice, you got to get rid of them. They're rodents. They're gonna make they're big trouble there over in the mountains. Everyone's got mouse traps all over the place. There are 5 things that make one forget one's learning. So stay away from these things. Those, we're spending so much energy and effort learning together at Babble and Talmud. You don't want to forget it. So here you go. Stay away from these things. Somebody who eats from that which a mouse ate from. From that which a cat ate from. Who eats the heart of an animal. That's an interesting one. Somebody who eats lots of olives. Interesting. If you were using water to launder, clothing, don't drink that water. And somebody who washes his feet one above the other. There's those who say, also somebody who puts his clothing underneath his head. There are 5 things that reinstate one's learning. Paspromen, bread baked on coals. Interesting. And certainly the coals themselves. What if you eat coals? I don't know. Somebody who eats a roasted egg without salt. Somebody who eats a lot of olive oil, consumes a lot of olive oil. Somebody who drinks wine with some and spices. Somebody who eats the water left over from, making dough. Some say also somebody who dips his finger in salt and then eats it. Okay. When we said that somebody who consumes olive oil regularly, that is good for his memory, that supports Rabbi Yochanan. Just like eating too many olives will make one forget 70 years worth of learning. Well, somebody who eats olive oil, consumes olive oil, it will restore the learning of 70 years. Okay. We said somebody who regularly consumes wine and spices. This supports Rava. The Omar Rava says Rava that wine and aromatic spices, smells and stuff make one smarter. I think he's saying it made him smarter. Somebody who sticks his finger into salt. Somebody who sticks one finger into salt. Like a machlokes Tanaim, Rabbi Omer achas v'lo shtayim. Rabbi says 1 finger, not 2 fingers. Rabbi Yossi Omer shtayim v'lo shalosh. Rabbi Yossi says 2 fingers, not 3 fingers. The way to remember that the machlokes is about 1 finger versus 2 fingers is that if you take your 4 fingers, not your fingers, your 5 fingers minus your thumb, and you take your 3rd finger and you put it down like to your palm, so you have basically you have 2 groups of fingers now. There's 1 finger in one group and 2 fingers in the other group, and that's how you remember their machlokas. There are 10 things that are very difficult for one's learning. Somebody who walks beneath the reins of a camel. Certainly underneath a camel itself. Somebody walks between 2 camels. Nashim, somebody who walks between two women, Va'isha overes ben shnei anashim, and a woman who walks between two men, Va'over mitachas reach ra shel nevela, somebody who walks beneath a foul smell of nevela, unslaughtered meat. Va'over tachas agesher shlo avru tachtav ma'im shel mem yom, somebody who walks beneath a bridge that water has not flown under it for 40 days. Va'ochel pas shelo bashal kol tzarko, somebody who eats bread that is not fully baked. Va'ochel basar mizuama listeron, somebody who eats meat from a greasy spoon. Va'ashosa me amas hamayim, somebody who drinks from a body of water, a stream of water. Ha'overes bebeis hakvaros, that passes through a cemetery. V'mistakel b'fnei ames, and somebody who looks at the face of a corpse. Veishom af akore ksav shel gabi hakever, some say even those who read the writing on a tombstone. Chevre, we are going to stop. We're going to conclude Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Horayos here, and we will pick up from here and wrap up Masechta Horayos tomorrow. Chevre, that was Daf Yud Gimel, Daf 13, the second to last Daf of Masechta Horayos. This Masechta that is only 14 daf, but full of ginormous daf. Sheesh, I thought that maybe this daf would go a little quicker. I don't think that this was a particularly quick daf, but okay. Anyways, the first thing that we discussed in today's daf was precedence for korbanis. That was taka very interesting. Kol tadir michavero kodem es chavero. Tadir kodem. What's that? Kol tadir kodem. I'm forgetting the phrase now. Anyway, oh gosh, it's 10 o'clock. I haven't even started learning yet. Yeah. Tadir v'sheinu tadir kodem. That's what I'm thinking of. So we discussed that and right that chatases come before olas and all that kind of stuff. Very interesting things. Also, we talked about that a kohen comes before, it takes precedence for liftach rishon, nevarich rishon, v'lito mana yafa rishon. Very interesting things about precedence there. Precedence for men and women that talked about, okay, who do you save first? Who do you release from captivity first? And we got into all sorts of precedences. And then we continued with the precedence discussion, talking about hierarchies within the yidden, Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim, all sorts of stuff like that. The last Mishnah of Masechta Horayos wrapped up with an interesting tidbit of Mamzer Talmud Chacham Kodem LeKohen Gadol Amaretz, that even a mamzer who is a Talmud Chacham takes precedence over a Kohen Gadol who is an Amaretz Chevre. That was Daf Yud Gimel of Masechta Horayos. I hope you enjoyed. I will catch you tomorrow for the conclusion of Masechta Horayos. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I'll catch you later. Peace out.